Hello and welcome to Good Morning UK Have Your Say, a Force for Good's mid-morning show coming to you live from our nerve centre here in the heart of the great British city of Glasgow with me, your host, Alistair McConaughey. And I'm very excited to be hosting this, our 30th show of Good Morning UK Have Your Say. Another example of the power of stick-to-itiveness. Stick-to-itiveness. Just keep doing it, and before you know it, you've built up a very strong portfolio of shows. And we've got a great show coming up. We've got a guest at the top of the hour. It is back by popular demand, the legend who is Max Dunbar, and he's going to be sitting beside me right there at the top of the hour for 20 minutes, talking about the state of our country, the state of the world, and the state of the universe. We're British, we love the United Kingdom, and we want to stay together. And we are the people who are doing exactly that. And there's nobody else out there at the moment who is promoting it in this way. We are carrying the load, as they say. I'm sharing about as I speak to various sites as well. So we are the voice of mainstream pro-UKism, or unionism to use the other term. And we've been that voice now since 2012, and we intend to continue to be so for a very long time. Now, please, folk, if you have any thoughts about what's happening to the country, please send them in. Please send in questions for myself and also for our guest at 11 o'clock, Max Dunbar, and we will do our very best to answer them. Robert mentioned something about about what happened yesterday in Edinburgh Castle, and we're going to mention that in a minute, because it's actually something of really quite of interest, actually, to many of us. Good morning, Catherine, and to Tommy Mowat. Where do you start with what's wrong with the country? Well, let's start with a Horsebox, because this was brought to my attention this morning, and I'll just share the picture of the Horsebox, which is, that's it there, and it says the Michael Russell Mobile Centre for Independence. And there's not much to say about that other than he managed to spell all these words correctly, which is something. But he seems very pleased with himself there with his definitive article, the Michael Russell Mobile Centre. And as somebody pointed out to me earlier today, he's also got to have his whole name in there as well. It's not like the Russell Mobile Centre or whatever, it's the Mobile Centre. I'm surprised he didn't put whatever letters after his name that he's got there. But that's kind of crazy. I don't know what he does with that. I think he drives about Argyll, and if you want to talk about separation, you can go into the Horsebox with him, which is, I have to say, not something that I personally would risk doing, and I would advise against it. But he's got that mobile travelling thing there, and maybe in a year or two somebody will make a horror movie about that. I don't know. But that's the Michael Russell Mobile Centre for Independence, which we're just putting up there so we can have a laugh at his expense. Sandra says, how many attended the march on Saturday? Yes, the what group was it? I can't recall what group was it. Anyway, there was a march for separating Scotland and for breaking up the British Isles. It was an anti-British march in Glasgow just on Saturday, and we counted them precisely in at 320. So there were 320 of them at the march on Saturday. We were not there. We didn't think it was worth wasting our time. It took something like 2.5 minutes to pass, and so it wasn't worth getting out of bed for, really, to be frank with you, as they say, to use the expression. But they marched on their road to nowhere. Yes, it was the SIM movement. That was it. The whatever that stands for. That it was those guys. 320 of them was exactly how many there were. Christopher says regarding the Horsebox debacle that it illustrates perfectly the complete hubris of Michael Russell. Any opinions on the SNP wading into the Afghan refugee argument? Well, we have, and we'll speak about that with our guest at the top of the hour, other than to say that the SNP wants to destroy Scotland completely. So it would open its doors not just to Afghanistan, but in fact, literally it does, and it's quite open about it. It wants to open its doors to the world. And they don't care what the consequences of that would be. It's the principle for them which is important, which is that there should really be, at the end of the day, no specific nation states able to defend their borders at all. That's part of that modern attitude that the SNP shares with most of the governing class, unfortunately, throughout the British Isles. Let's just have a quick... Bill says he thinks it was Scottish Nationalists. No, it wasn't actually. I'll tell you exactly. Well, I don't know enough about it, but I saw the video of the small group that went into Edinburgh Castle yesterday. Now, these people, from what I can see, I know I'm not associated with them, but I know that general group, and I know that sometimes they campaign here in George Square as well. And they're actually quite well-intentioned people. They're not political nationalists, nor are they particular unionists either. They're a small group of people who have become very concerned about, and I'm certainly not speaking for them, but as far as I can understand it, and as far as I can tell from the video that they released yesterday, they're concerned about the corruption within the Scottish political and judicial establishment, and they're specifically concerned about the levels of what might be called paedophilia within the Scottish administration and judicial system. And there is no doubt that that does exist, in the sense that many of our laws, the laws that we were hearing, the guidance at least that was coming in this week from the so-called Scottish government about children of 4 years old being allowed to change their gender and all that absolute nonsense. I mean, that's a paedophilia agenda. There's no question about that. And the people who would write those guidelines, whether they are consciously or unconsciously realizing it, they are definitely promoting that kind of mentality, because they themselves are obsessing about the sexuality of 4-year-olds. Now, that is paedophilia, however you dress that up. So this small group is actually generally correct in its view of how things are going within certain elements of the establishment who are writing laws and creating laws. Having said that, I don't really know much else about them, other than to say it was very interesting that they used, as part of their justification for doing what they do, the Magna Carta. Now, I find that fascinating and also quite gratifying, because we've always believed at A Force for Good that these constitutional documents, whether they were in their day and age specifically related to Scotland, or whether they were related to England largely, they all form part of our British constitutional history, and they have all contributed in some way to our British constitutional order. So you'll get the Scottish Nationalists who say, Magna Carta never applied to Scotland, you don't know your history. And then we have to go back to them and say, well, actually, Alexander II, the King of Scotland, sent down Alan de Galloway, who was the High Constable of Scotland, who was one of the people at Runnymede on the 12th of June in 1215, who approved the Magna Carta. And there was also a man from Wales, a man from Ireland, and even a man from France. So the Magna Carta was very much a British event, and we wrote an article about that, and we'll put that up there in the link. And as for its effect, as for its legal effect, historians tend to be agreed that at that time it did not have much of a legal effect, and I believe that the Pope actually declared it null and void. But that's kind of absolutely irrelevant, because the value of Magna Carta over time is what it has contributed to the constitutional and democratic order of the British-derived world. And when we, throughout the British Empire, when we were setting up parliaments and things like that, Magna Carta and the general principles involved in that would apply. So it's very much a British historical document. And we've got an old copy here of the Magna Carta. Now, generally the main area of Magna Carta is that people talk about is paragraphs 39 and 40. Paragraph 39, no free man shall be seized or imprisoned or stripped of his rights or possessions or outlawed or exiled or deprived of his standing in any other way, nor will we proceed with force against him or send others to do so, except by the lawful judgment of his equals or by the law of the land. Now that sort of thing in 1215 was pretty revolutionary, to say the least, and you have to say that has formed, some might argue up until now, the basis of our legal system. So Magna Carta has had huge effect upon everywhere in the British Isles, and to pretend that it never applied to Scotland is just sheer ignorance. Sheer ignorance. And the Scottish Nationalists are full of that, I have to say. And paragraph 40, to no one will we sell, to no one deny or delay right or justice. And so important elements there of the Magna Carta. And so it was very interesting to see it being made live again yesterday, which just shows that even though that's a 1215 document, it still has a presence, it still has a life today. So that's what we want to say about the folk who were in Edinburgh Castle, and please don't mistake them for Scottish nationalists. They're not political nationalists or unionists as such. They've got a different agenda, and they're concerned about the clear paedophiliac corruption within the Scottish establishment, which is going to become clearer now as well. It's going to become clearer because we've got this cabbage coalition going on, which is to say the SNP joining with the Scottish Cabbage Party. And the Scottish Cabbage Party are extremely sinister as far as these sorts of strange things are concerned. So we will have to be on the lookout, but it all will become clear. Everything will be made manifest in the long run. And another one, here's Chick saying, he heard the Nats want to keep emergency COVID laws permanently in Scotland, anything to give them that bit of control over our lives. Absolutely. They want to set these laws in permanently, and you know what? They'll manage to do that because they've got a governing majority to do that, and there's who is going to deny them that? That's the thing. Is the Labour Party or the Tories or the Lib Dems in Scotland going to stand up and say, no, actually your mask mandates and your vaccine mandates and your passport mandates and all of that kind of stuff and your lockdown nonsense, it's all a load of baloney? Are they going to do that? Do we have the opposition that will do that? And until we have that opposition, I'm afraid we're all going to get what we deserve from these people who are running the country. Richard says, hopefully the Nats will destroy themselves before they finish off Scotland. I think that they are going to make themselves more obvious to people who have not yet woken up, but whether or not that is going to be enough, we'll just have to see. We'll have to see. But we shouldn't maybe take too much concern for the morrow. It will work itself out, but we need to be wise. We need to be wise to what they're doing. Good. Richard says there's no problems there as far as the broadcast is concerned. We've at the top of the hour in 10 minutes, we've got the legend who is Max Dunbar, and we're going to talk a bit more about the state of the world, especially the state of Afghanistan and Joe Biden and the craziness that's going on. On this day in British history, we'll talk about a couple of things right now. One was the first British person who was born in North America, and her name was Virginia Dare. And it was on this day, the 18th of August in 1587. And she was born to Ananias and Eleanor Dare from London on Roanoke Island in North Carolina, and she's considered to be the first British child to have been born in what was to become the USA. But nobody knows what happened to her. Nobody knows what happened to her because she was born into what was called the Lost Colony of Roanoke, and various theories abound as to what possibly happened to them. Some people think they were simply slaughtered by the local Indians. Others say they may have integrated in some way or moved elsewhere. However, the lost colony of Roanoke is a mystery. But Virginia Dare was born there. And she was the first child to be baptized as well in the territory of what was then the 13 states, and that was Virginia Dare. There was also a wine in America called Virginia Dare wine, and they used a face, and they called her the first lady of the land. Virginia Dare. There's a picture of her there, a painting of her being baptized by what was to become the lost colony of Roanoke, but a British character, no doubt part of our greater British history. And what else happened on this day, on the 18th of August in 2018? A force for good stood up to the SNP marchers in Dundee, and they were having one of their shambolic slouches through the city centre, getting in the way of everybody and generally making a nuisance of themselves. So we were there to tell them to stop being silly and to stand up for the United Kingdom, to stand up for solidarity and to stand against separation. And of course they exaggerated that there were 16,000 of them, but we counted them. We had a really good vantage point. We counted them, and we counted 3,538 of them. So they exaggerated their numbers by over 4 times. And that was on this day, on the 18th of August in 2018, when we stood up to the Scot Nat marchers in Dundee. And thank you to everybody who was there on that day. We'll put up a wee link about that tonight. So yes, that was this day in British history. We'll put up the link to Virginia Dare as well on our Facebook page when after this programme is finished. So folks, please remember we've got the legend who is Max Dunbar coming up at the top of the hour, and that's going to be great fun. The Sturgeon Shuffle, that's another one. The Sturgeon Shuffle, says Richard. TC says, was glad to see quite a few Union flags flying as I got the bus from Aberdeen to Fraserburgh. Not so many as the Saltire, but a good number flying in people's gardens. Good. That's good to see. Keeping the British end up. That's what they're doing when they do that. Paul says, did you know that the book Shogun was based on a 16th century Scot that discovered Japan? I didn't know that, no. Scots played a big part in building Britain, that's for sure. I didn't know the Japanese connection. Must look into that. Thanks for that, Paul. Jord Depend says, greetings from Canada. Good to hear. Well, you've got your work cut out over there in Canada, that's for sure. Let's hope that the man-child that's running the show gets kicked out in September. But if the Canadians vote for the oppression which he has delivered them in the last 18 months, then what can you say? I think Jonathan's right here. He goes, there's a competition between governments around the world about who can impose the most ridiculous COVID measures. I think New Zealand is currently winning, having recently taken the prize from New South Wales. Oh yeah, that there absolutely is. And once you give these people that kind of power, then they don't relinquish it. And that's such a pity, because that's not how a politician is meant to do. A politician is meant to get in there and facilitate maximum liberty for people, not to actually destroy the society, not to destroy the economy, not to literally lock people up. The presumption should always be maximum liberty, and that should not be taken away. And that was certainly understood back in the days when the British were colonising North America. And, that kind of mentality, that sort of pioneering mentality has built not just America and Canada as well, but also the United Kingdom, of course. But what has happened over time is we've all become too comfortable, and we've lost that pioneering spirit of liberty, and we've allowed that our understanding to be perverted, so that we believe that politicians are there to keep us safe when they're actually not. They're just there to protect our freedoms. That's the way you should be looking at it. Not look into the government to keep you safe, but look into the government to protect your freedoms as freeborn humans. It's been very clear in the past that you don't kind of mess with Afghanistan, because it's such a big area. The British were in it 3 times, in 1939 to 1842. We lost that fairly badly. 1839 to 1842, and then again in 1878, and then again in 1919. And we didn't come out of any of that particularly well. And we didn't bother going back in. And then it was the Soviets who went back in on Christmas Day in 1979. And they had a very hard time from the Mujahideen. Remember the Mujahideen? They were our friends back then. We were on their side, apparently, because they were fighting the Soviets. And then it wasn't until 1988 when Sylvester Stallone came along and made Rambo 3 and finally tanned their backsides, that they decided that they had to get out of Afghanistan because Rambo was there. I'm joking, of course, but I actually used that because when I was younger, that's how my understanding of Afghanistan came about. It was by watching Rambo 3. And in particular, it was by watching this little video, which I'll actually bring up. And this is a clip from Rambo 3. And I think it actually says everything that you need to know about Afghanistan. Now, yeah, so I remember watching that in 1988 and thinking, well, do you know what? We shouldn't be bothering with getting involved in that field. And back when the Americans and the British went in, again in October 2001 and November 2001, I personally was totally against it, because I could see that there was going to be no good ending here. And everything has just proven us to be correct. And we went into that conflict basically because of 9/11, which was in September of that year. And we were told by the media and the system that these tribesmen sitting in their caves had somehow been able to fly two planes into the World Trade Center and also blow up WT7 from the ground up. And to most people, of course, that didn't make any sense whatsoever, but that was the story that we were told. And we are where we are here today. Now, okay, let me bring in my guest now. Fantastic.
We are.
Good.
Morning, everybody. Great to be back here with Alistair and all our supporters.
Fantastic. Good. Folks, please do say hello to Max, the legend who is Max Dunbar. And if you've any questions for the legend who is Max Dunbar, please send them in. Adam says, there's the man himself, Max. Kathleen says, hi, Max.
Hello, Kathleen.
Max, have you been following the Afghanistan debacle at all?
I've been doing my best to follow it, but before we talk about that, I'd like to just go back to what you were saying earlier on about the COVID regulations and the Western governments competing with one another effectively to see who can impose the most repressive system on their hapless citizens. I just thought, I've got this magazine here which I think is indicative of the attitude, certainly in Scotland, because it's the magazine of the National Library of Scotland, summer 2021, and here it is. I think it's fairly clear where they're coming from, and everything within this magazine is on the same, obviously the same kind of theme, same lines. So this is really the establishment. It's the Scottish establishment, and really, probably, to be honest, the UK establishment as well. But I think that really just shows you how things have gone and where we are, and who the enemy is.
Yes. Well, certainly you're not going to get a role in Scottish quangoism unless you are part of that left liberal establishment.
Yeah.
If you were supportive of the wrong political party, whatever, you're not going to get chosen, especially under the Scottish National Party, because they very much use the organs of the state and the organs, the quangos, in order to ensure that they get their people in, because they understand the importance of full spectrum dominance.
Yes.
Full spectrum dominance.
Absolutely.
And therefore, you'll get a very nice paying job in these quangos if you go along with the program.
Yeah.
And if you don't go along with the program, then you're out. And that's we can't necessarily speak entirely for sure of all of these organizations, but that's the general principle anyway, is that you're not going to, it's not going to be like somebody like ourselves who are ever going to get appointed to running these big organizations.
Yeah.
And because these cultures as well, they're self-maintaining. You don't get in the front door if you don't look right.
Yes.
Basically.
Well, talking of which, I can show you a photograph of their.
Yeah, I know. I know what you're saying.
Okay.
I know what you're saying, but it's certainly you have to look a certain way to get into these organizations. No question about it. And at schools as well. Good to see Linda enjoying the show so far. So yeah, getting back to Afghanistan, Max, you've been.
I've been following it like everyone else has probably been following it, and it's all a bit confusing. It's a complete shambles. The Taliban have managed to take over the whole country incredibly quickly. But I can't help thinking that it's not really just the Taliban there. They're obviously getting a lot of backing from others. I mean, you don't get a ragtag bunch of mercenaries, basically. This is what they look like, taking over a whole country in that way so quickly, when they're up against an organised, or what should be, to all intents and purposes, an organised army, highly equipped with the best of stuff supplied by the Americans, and no doubt ourselves as well. There's obviously a lot more to it than than the media are telling us.
Well, that's right. John Sanderson here says, don't forget the Taliban destroyed opium production. As soon as America went back in, it was ramped up.
Yes.
Yeah, and what's the role of China in all of this as well? You know, does China have an interest in Afghanistan?
Well, China's been very quick to side with the Taliban and cozy up to them because, of course, the Taliban have done serious damage to their chief adversary, America, and they'll be rubbing their hands with glee, as no doubt will Pakistan and no doubt Russia too. It suits Russia. So these people will be siding with the new regime in Afghanistan. But I think it's worth bearing in mind that Afghanistan and Pakistan are kind of not just connected, but the people who inhabit these areas are really all the same people, the Pashtun tribes, and they've been moving, I think, relatively freely between Pakistan and Afghanistan. And when things have got hot for the Taliban in Afghanistan, they've melted away into Pakistan and been shielded there. It's also worth bearing in mind that when the Americans went in to take out Osama bin Laden, they did not notify the Pakistani authorities that they were going into Pakistan to carry out that operation. And I think that tells you all you need to know about Pakistan, how much you can trust the Pakistani government. So obviously there's a very strong connection between Pakistan and Afghanistan. In fact, the two countries were delineated in, I believe, 1893. The Durwood Line was drawn, and really it's like a lot of these borders, it's synthetic almost. And to all intents and purposes, the people within these areas, Pakistan and Afghanistan, have moved freely and don't really consider that border as such. So I think that's possibly how things are.
Yeah. And of course, with a weak American president,
yes,
who's basically a deep state American president, anything's now up for grabs, and we could be looking at the world going back into warfare, because whatever you might say about Trump, he was an outsider, he wasn't part of the deep state, and he was against the war machine, which many people promote. Many of governing powers promote just constant war for war's sake, and he tried to back off. Trump tried to back off from that by being much more American nationalistic, much more looking out for Americans' interests, but at the same time not taking any nonsense. Whereas what you've got with Biden is just like a deep state operative, basically, who's on his way out, and anybody can take advantage of him now, especially the Chinese. I mean, the world could be opened up to the Chinese now.
I think we're in a much more unstable condition than we were, say, post 1973, 74. I can't remember the date exactly, when the Americans evacuated from Vietnam, Saigon. And that was considered to be a real debacle and terrible for the prestige of the United States. But I think this debacle is more serious, because I think we're in a more unstable situation worldwide, and I think the consequences that will lead from this humiliation of America will be more serious than they were back then. That's just my feeling. I mean, there's a question of Taiwan, for example. The Chinese may now feel emboldened to take more drastic action to include Taiwan, formerly Formosa, within the communist regime, which, I mean, the Chinese have always felt sore about Formosa, now Taiwan, because it symbolizes the illegitimacy of the communist regime in China and the criminality of it. Taiwan is a living, continuous reminder to the world of where the legitimate, to my mind at least, the legitimate Chinese people, democratic Chinese people's government is. So they would like to wipe out Taiwan and expunge that symbol of freedom and symbol of their illegitimacy as a regime.
It's a good point. That's a good point. And who's going to stop them? Is Biden going to be able to? Will he even know what's going on, basically? But so yeah, it's just there's this sense that there's a kind of weakness, and here in the West, in the United Kingdom as well, we have a governing class, and I'm talking about the at Westminster, that's
Yes.
basically just allowing the borders to be open.
Yeah.
The laws, the international laws, have developed post World War II to the extent where a democratic country can basically no longer defend its own borders because it's almost illegal to defend its own borders, and it's so complicated not to so complicated to send these people back or to take any sort of physical action against them.
Yes.
And then there's a huge number of people in our society who have gone along with the new system,
Yes.
which is just like open borders,
Yeah,
no
just
nations,
accepting it.
just accepting it.
Yeah.
And there's almost a feeling like the West we've failed to make Afghanistan more Western.
Well, I would
So
say,
let's try and
yeah.
make the West more like Afghanistan.
Well, that's a very good way of putting it. But obviously, there's a doctrine at work there, and the Conservatives got themselves elected based on a lie. They've completely deceived people, and people feel powerless now to do anything about it. But I would say that we need to defend ourselves more against our own government than we do against the immigration, whatever you want to call it, influx of people that are likely to be coming. I mean, Johnson has extended an invitation to several million Chinese to come here. He's just, in the last few hours, extended an invitation, unknown numbers of Afghans to come here, and God knows who else. Open doors. That's not what I would call a Conservative government, and it's certainly not a government that's acting in the best interest of the British people. It seems as if the British people are almost incidental to and in the way of government policy. Government policy is not seemingly made for our benefit. It's being made for the benefit of a few radical extremists who wish to see an open borders system. With the clenched fist that I showed you earlier on being the main thing there.
That's right, and this is happening at a time when we can't leave the country unless we go through all sorts of silly rigmaroles about tests and injections and passports and all that kind of stuff. But as far as I can see it, this invite, and I saw a figure of 20,000 this morning, but I mean that'll grow.
Yes.
Is being extended to people like just straight away. They don't need to show anything.
Yes.
They don't need to take any tests. They're certainly not going to be excluded if they test COVID positive.
Yeah.
So it's all upside down and inverted.
It is.
And that's what is creating a sense among many of just demoralization.
Yes.
But
I
we
mean,
mustn't let that overwhelm us. We must understand what's happening, and that in itself gives us power, and to see who the opponents are.
Yes. Well, I would say that we stand for natural law. I mean, natural law being the defence of the realm, the defence of our people, putting our people first, a sense of decency in education, which Alistair, you mentioned earlier on, the assault on that.
Assault on children,
all these things, and we're British patriots, obviously. We're not allied to any one particular party, and it would appear that all the parties, all the mainstream parties within the UK, are pulling from the same place. They're all far left. They seem to have this far left dogma of mass immigration and introducing laws to suppress anyone who may have a contrary view or have dissident opinions. And we're seeing a form of totalitarianism. I know it sounds rather grim to say this, but I mean, we seem to be living under a totalitarian system now. We don't have free speech anymore. That's gone. We have to be very careful what we say. And Alistair and I are as careful as we possibly can in what we say. You get the gist of what we're saying, but we have to be careful how we frame it. And we shouldn't really have to do that if we're living in a democratic, free country. We should be able to say what we think freely, and other people who disagree with us should be free to disagree with us. I mean, that is the essence of democracy and free debate. And we're seeing layer upon layer of legislation and laws, draconian laws brought in, protected characteristics, hate crime, and so on, all being imposed upon us, really against our will.
Mm-hmm.
There are a very small number of people in favour of it, I would say, but most people disagree with these things. These laws being
all of
imposed
that
on us.
stuff needs to get swept away.
Swept away.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All of these, anything to do with so-called hate crime, just has to get swept away, and it has to. That has to be that revolution, just to get rid of that and to get back to the day and age where the fundamental principle was liberty and freedom.
Yes, well,
and,
I mean,
and you deal with it.
It's a counter. It's actually not that would not be a revolution. That would be a counter-revolution, really, because what we've been undergoing over the last few years has been a revolution, a top-down revolution. Because virtually every institution worth penetrating has been penetrated by people of that way of thinking, and we really need to oppose that, and that's a counter-revolution. But a counter-revolution isn't necessarily the opposite of a revolution, and it's always worth bearing that in mind. Although we're not revolutionary-minded people per se, we're conservative-minded in the sense that we want continuity, stability, and the country run for the benefit of the British people and our children and our children's children. We'd like to leave the country in good condition for our descendants.
Do you know, I'm on Twitter, and it is a cesspool, Twitter, there's no question about it, but what I find very interesting is that you can tell that if somebody is pro-open borders, they're also going to be pro-vaccine passport, they're also going to be pro-vaccinating children, they're also going to be pro-EU, they're also going to be all these things that all come as a package. It's really, really interesting to see, but you know that if they're open borders, if they're for all these crazy hate crimes, they're for all the things wearing masks, that's a big one.
Yeah.
If they're mask fanatics, they're always pro-EU for some strange reason.
Yes.
It must be a psychological thing. It must be. But you can almost tell, well, you can easily tell. Now, you just go into the person's profile and it's like, this is incredible, you know.
Well, that's the way politics are polarised.
Aye.
They've completely polarised. But unfortunately, they've polarised in favour of these people.
They're running it. They're running it. And that's the
the
Conservative Party and the Labour Party and certainly the Lib Dems and also, of course, the SNP, which goes without saying.
Yeah.
Although there are some people now in the SNP who are kind of breaking away, like the Alba crowd. I'm not going to give them any credit, really, but the Alba was a slight breakaway from that, and you'll find slightly more politically incorrect people in Alba.
Yes.
Slightly more of a traditional mind among some of them.
And people like Jim Sillars as well. I mean, he can been a contrarian as far as the main SNP are concerned. So
absolutely. So that's the thing. So let's end on a positive note. And what's the positive note about Afghanistan that we can possibly think of? I would say just watch the Rambo video again and see that it's always a bad idea to get involved in Afghanistan, or indeed, for that matter, any of these Arabic nations, because I do believe that there was anyway, certainly back in the beginning of the 2000s, and still ongoing, there is a long-running process by the deep state to destabilize all these Arab states and just keep them in a state of perpetual chaos and turmoil, for various reasons which we won't get into. But there is undoubtedly, because I used to live in Libya, you know, and when I lived in Libya, I say I used to live in Libya, my parents lived in Libya, I tagged along as a small child, but...
Did you not meet Gaddafi himself?
Well, let's not go there at this moment. But
as a child.
But I mean, as a Westerner, it was a lovely place, and I have very, very happy memories of it. And all the Libyans that I've ever met at school, or that my father worked with, or my mother dealt with, or whatever, all very lovely, nice folk. And the whites were just considered just a part of the furniture, and in fact were appreciated because Gaddafi knew that the whites were working in the oil industry and keeping the country going. and it held together, and it was lovely. It's a lovely weather, beautiful Mediterranean Sea, lovely Roman ruins, great country. And then what happened? It got destroyed by the West. One of the terrible, terrible things that the deep state has done was the Libyan catastrophe. Unforgivable, really. And Afghanistan's just all part of that whole geopolitical
Well, the Americans lost
chaos.
their ambassador there. He was murdered by militants in Libya around about that time. So they made a real mess up there. Mess up.
Yeah, totally. John maybe ends on a positive note. Afghanistan is an example of what a determined people can achieve if they play the long game. That's so. Well, we've certainly got a very long game to play here in the United Kingdom. Let's hope that after the long time has passed, there still will be a recognisable country left called the United Kingdom. But if the politicians have their way and they just basically flood us with everybody in the world, then there'll be no country in the world that's recognisable anymore. Max, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure as always, Alistair.
Good. We'll have you back on as soon as we possibly can. We've got a guest next week and then another guest after that, but we'll see about getting you on in September sometime.
Okay then.
So thanks very much.
Bye.
Bye. Brilliant stuff. That's the legend who is Max Dunbar. Paul says, take care, Max. Somebody's asking, what's that t-shirt that you're wearing, Alistair? This is our A Force for Good classic red t-shirt. You can get this at our Teespring store. We'll put up the link for that. You can get this t-shirt, but you can also get Scottish and British, British Ulster, Welsh and British, British and Proud, various really good t-shirts and hoodies as well. Somebody asks, what's this? This is my Johnny Cash tour jacket from Europe, 1986. I'm afraid that's not for sale. Ross says, cheers again, Max. Wise words. And Bill says, thanks, Max. Please, if you haven't already got one, please do get a copy of A Wee Book for the Union, which is a great wee introduction to where we're coming from as British and Scottish patriots. And there's information in here for everybody about our history and some good little points about how to argue for the UK. And we're making good progress, I should say, with our 36-page magazine. Looks like it might actually turn into a 40-page magazine because there's still a lot to say that we didn't have space for so far. So we'll see how that goes, but that should be coming out towards the end of September. And that's free to everybody who is a paid-up Union supporter. Okay, so you'll get that magazine free. If you're a Union supporter, you'll get a 40-page special bumper edition of Union Heart. You'll get that free if you're a Union supporter. That is given a wee chip in each month to help keep this going. And most of our supporters pay £1.15 a week, which is a £5 a month. And that really does add up. And that's what keeps this show on the road, because we have a great team here. We have myself, we have a political outreach administrator, we have a social media curator, we have Facebook help, and we have a security advisor as well. So we've got a wee good team. We all work each day on this, and for some of us it's our part-time income, and for me it's my full-time work. This is what I do for my bread and butter. So we keep this show on the road through the good help of the Union supporters. So please do become a Union supporter. And if you don't want to become a Union supporter, maybe you just want to chip in just a one-off donation, and we'll put the one-off links up there as well. Bill asks if he is donating, is it better to use DonorBox or straight to the AFFG bank account? Well, if you donate via DonorBox will take a percentage. So we actually get a wee bit more if you donate directly to the AFFG bank account. And if you're interested in doing that, Bill, please do tell us, send us an email to contact@aforceforgood.uk and we'll send you the bank details. So thank you for that. Folks, it's been a blast today. It's been really good. Thank you so much to our thank you so much to our guest, the legend who is Max Dunbar. Always got a lot to say about things, always got a very good take on matters. Somebody who thinks very deeply about many geopolitical and political issues. He always has, and we like to mine him for information, because that's what it's all about. Information. We need information. What does that come from? That's the prisoner. Okay, folks, it just remains for me to say thank you very, very much for watching. Please do share. Thank you for all your comments today. It's been a really good show. This has been our 30th show. We'll be back next Wednesday for our 31st show. And as always, it just remains for me to say, God bless the United Kingdom and God save the Queen. See you next week.